So what we're looking here is a VMRay analysis report from a malicious email, or at least just starting with an email that we have observed a couple of weeks ago. This is related to LockBit operations, and I have mentioned before that it's quite unusual for ransomware gangs to go with mass emails, just trying to get as much as infections as possible. And this is what we can see here. It's even though it's unusual, they maybe just went with this approach because of their takedown. Maybe they are running out of money, and maybe they are just needing more money. That's the reason why they're going with this approach. So when we look here into this email, we see this is an overview of a VMRay platform report here. We see this malicious verdict, and we provide this user-reported phishing integration. So there is an Outlook plugin where a user, which is the first point of contact for these emails, just receives this in their inbox, and then they just can press a simple button in Outlook saying, well, please detonate this email into VMRay Sandbox. And just within a couple of minutes, we're returning a result, whether this email is good to be used or if it's malicious. In this case, we already see it's a bad email, and we definitely need to take a closer look into this one. As I've mentioned previously, for email, it's very common that they are trying to use either attachments or embedded URLs. So for security solutions, it's very important to not only look into the email, but also recursively look into each URL and look into each attachment, because any of this, in theory, can cause malicious behaviors. Here we see there is an attachment which is called document.zip, and it's an archive, which is per se, I think, nothing malicious, right? There are often being archives sent through emails. So we definitely need to take a closer look into this here. And within this static analysis, we see here, at least for now, only an antivirus system, which is a third-party integration triggered. But stay tuned. There is more that we can discover here within this analysis. Following this archive, which is recursively submitted by VMRay platform anyways, we can see here, again, it's just a static analysis of this file that has been attached to an email. It's malicious again, mainly based on antivirus matches here. But the most important thing is, of course, archives do contain files. That's what they are supposed to do, right? So we need to take a closer look, and we see here there's another embedded file, in this case, which is called document.doc.scr. For a lot of people, when they say, oh, it's document.doc, this might be a legitimate file. But if you have awareness, if you're being trained, if you're being given a professional, this should already raise somehow your alarms, because this is definitely not looking great. It seems to be a file that's trying to be maybe masquerading an Office document because of its name and the file extension. But if you take a closer look, it's also using the SCR extension, which in fact just stands for a Windows screensaver file, and that's an executable. We definitely want to take a closer look here, and VMRay platform also provides an automated recursive submission for this file. And now we finally reach the state where we're going into the dynamic analysis, which just means that we take this file, we detonate this file into a properly secured analysis environment and just execute it. So we just let it run. And during this execution, we are going ahead, and from the outside, we are trying to monitor and capture all of the behaviors that this file might cause during execution. And now just imagine, if you would go ahead and say, we don't use security solutions, we maybe just don't care about this because we have AVs and so on and so forth, and this file gets not catched, then this is exactly the behavior that you would also see in your environment if a user would click on this file. So we provide this safe and secure environment where we can get a quick overview of what this is about. In this case, we already see it's classified as a wiper and a ransomware, and as a threat name, we have the association with LockBit. So now we draw this sort of line and the connection. We have this email, which is a mass spam, and it seems to distribute a LockBit ransomware sample. Of course, we want to understand more what is happening here. So let's take a look here into the VMRay threat identifiers. We call them in short just VTIs, and also developed by VMRay and used to accurately evaluate and score behavior that we can cause, that we can report and catch during the dynamic execution of the sample. Additionally, in this report, we see here some screenshots that have been taken throughout the analysis and a very brief and short summary of the processes that have been created during the execution. And I'm sure it's very important for a lot of people here in the call. We also provide a mapping to the MITRE ATT&CK matrix here, which means that in fact, the behavior that we detect during dynamic execution that the sample causes, we will ensure that our VTIs are mapping to the MITRE attack, that we also understand and get a very, very quick overview just by looking here into this matrix in the end. In this case, for example, I like looking into the defense evasion column. We see that the sample seems to try disabling security tools, which of course, in fact, a legitimate software should not do, right? So you can already have an understanding what is happening here. In addition, on this impact column, we see a lot of alerting things, right? Service stopping, the attempt of stopping services. And of course, the data encryption for impact. And I think just within a couple of minutes, or even maybe just seconds, while looking into this report, we get already an understanding what this sample is doing and which impact it would have in your environment. All of this information we just provide in a couple of minutes. In this case, it's an analysis time for 4 minutes where you can see all of this behavior. And this is even already an extended timeout. Usually it's set to 2 minutes where you have already enough information to either decide whether this is malicious or not. But we want to know more about this LockBit sample. So just taking a brief look what is happening here. We see a YARA match that identifies this file as LockBit, but via a unique way. VMRay records function strings. So whenever you have obfuscated strings, you have a lot of obfuscation in your file. At a specific point when a sample during execution calls APIs from Windows, for example, the arguments that it passes to it needs to be decrypted. They need to be, at least if possible, readable, right? And we just capture these readable arguments to get more information on what is happening there. We see here another very usual behavior for ransomware. In this case, we see that a lot of files are getting renamed by just extending an extension, right? It's this TE8 and so on and so forth. So this is likely the extension that is used by the ransomware. As we've seen before, it tries to disable antivirus software. In this case, I think it's Microsoft Defender. As Andrew also mentioned before, a lot of these files, maybe not ransomware, but at least the loaders that are going prior, that they use prior to this ransomware execution, are trying to be detecting this analysis environment. They're trying to be hidden, right? So we see here the attempt to hide a threat from the analysis environment. And then we also have a very typical behavior that we see in ransomware is they are dropping a ransom node. The user that they're trying to attack and infect, they need to be aware that there's something bad happened. There was an impact to their system. So in this case, we see 705 times the same file being dropped into just different locations. And my favorite here that we see, they want to make it very obvious that something bad happened. So LockBit also is one of the ransomware families that are adjusting the screenshot of your system. If you know what it looks like, we have the screenshot recorded, of course, during the execution. And here you get already the most obvious confirmation that something bad happened because the screen changed. They're saying LockBit black, and all your important files are being stolen and encrypted, which in fact, in this case, is not fully true. We haven't observed any data exfiltration with this analysis or with this sample. So they even maybe make it worse whenever they just say we have also stolen your files and not just encrypted them. So within a couple of minutes or seconds, we understand this overall behavior. We know what happened. But if you really want to dive deeper, which is likely possible and required, if you have already an incident, if you do need to do incident investigation afterwards because you want to know what is happening, you want to try to rebuild and try to build your detection environment and improve it, of course, then we provide all of this information as well in a way more detailed version. So here we see a list of processes that's being executed. And now let's jump directly to the one that is responsible for doing the actual encryption on the files. Here's once more this VMRay function strings that we've extracted with a YARA match to identify the sample, but we want to focus here on the file operations. So within, remember, just 4 minutes of execution, we recorded nearly 12,000 operations on files. Well, this is likely for ransomware. And if we try to think how ransomware works, of course, they need to look through all of the files. They need to iterate files. Which ones are the ones that they want to encrypt? Then, of course, they need to open these files. They need to read the content out of these files. And of course, they also need to somewhere drop this ransomware node across the system that the user is actually aware on what is happening. When they have read the content of the original files, then of course they will encrypt it in the background. And at a specific point, they also need to write it back, right? It's kind of obvious, and then they just delete and remove the original files. And all of this, what we're seeing here, is most likely related to Windows API calls. So VMRay provides a very detailed tracking of Windows APIs that are being called to ensure we capture all of this behavior and all of the important information. In this case, this is a very brief look into the so-called function log, where we see in this case, they are calling the NT-set information thread API with some arguments that are just being used to hide this thread from a debugger. And this, of course, is also happening for all of the other API calls, ensuring that we capture all of this important behavior and we can drive the correct behavioral report and also the correct detection. And finally, one of the most important things here is, of course, we also provide the IOCs. So during the analysis and during this execution, we can collect a lot of IOCs throughout this report. And the IOCs are very important. And it's especially important to have high quality IOCs, because those are the artifacts that you can use to enrich your detection to ensure you cover everything that might be related to this specific sample, or if you want to analyze others as well, and just enrich your environment and the data that you already have, right? VMRay provides a lot of IOCs and a lot of artifacts for different types. In this case, we have files, we have file names, which is hashes, the ransomware extension, of course, registry operation, process operation, and if available, of course, also network operation. So you can use this process image names, you can use command line arguments, you can use this process graph to understand which processes are being spawned by which other processes, and so on and so forth, to just build additional detection rules for EDR systems, for example, to enrich your detection capabilities. Well, now, finally, let's go into the most important takeaways and go into actually these points that we would like to share with you today. I've just recently came across an interview, I think it was, where someone just said, if you're being able to stop the loader, you will be able to stop the ransomware as well. And that totally makes sense, right? So to make this a bit more generic, we would even say the earlier you can catch an attack, the earlier you can catch malicious files, the less impact you will see in your environment. And this is the important message where we believe that integrating a lot of different best-in-class security tools, security solutions, collecting them, making them communicating with each other, right? Integrating in sandboxes. So really that you have this big picture of what is happening is really the most important step that can really prevent a lot of attacks that are happening. So there are different levels, right? We have email, there is the network level, there is a host level, right? Where different tools may be better than others, but I think each single tool just doesn't provide that much of value. We really need to connect these tools together. And of course, if you use a sandbox in the background, which each of these tools can detonate files to get the most valuable information out of this, you can have faster IOC generation with this automation, which in fact you can then just use to enable you creating rules and policies for your detection engineering. Considering you're running EDRs, right? You can just take all of this information that, or if you're running EDRs or SIEMs, you can take all of this information, you can feed this into the systems and trying to catch threats as early as possible. And of course, not to forget here that taking all of this information on one side assists you in threat hunting efforts. So if you really want to be very proactive, you're trying to collect as many files as you can, you just analyze these files. Collecting all of these IOCs, this can help you to ensure that attacks are catched as early as possible, because you know all of the IOCs. You know what you need to look for. And this is also very important. And finally, not only if you're doing incident response, if you also want to do forensics and so on and so forth, it's often also important for organizations just to understand the TTPs for threat modeling, right? And taking all of this data, collecting this together and trying to get this big picture is something that is really valuable, and also something where VMRay platform with the analysis can help you a lot.